those of you that prefer to have a little bit more control may have looked or may have what's called a self-managed super fund. That is, you are master of your own money. You choose where it's invested. You decide how it goes and where it should be invested. So you're effectively planning for your own retirement. Now, what do most people want to do? Well, they want to follow what they do outside of super. So that is invest in residential real estate. So, we've seen a ton of people that have got an investment property, which they brought through super fund, and they own their family home outside of super. Seems like a great idea. And I know it's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. I think it was probably more than a decade ago that the rules changed and you were able to borrow in your super fund specifically to buy a residential property. That being said, there are a ton of rules. It is quite a specialist area. And despite being a chartered accountant, I don't profess to be an expert in there. So Lucas has been doing a fair bit of work on this. I know he's had a lot of buyers recently buying their super fund. So Lucas, perhaps can you sort of explain to people as to how they might buy, but where are some of the traps that they've got to look out for and what are some of these key rules so that this dream of a happy retirement with residential real estate doesn't turn out to be a nightmare?
Yes, James. Look, like you said, super fund, buying through a self-managed super fund, it's a great idea. The low borrowing interest rates, the continuously increasing housing prices, and also the interest that the funds are receiving is so low. So a lot of people buy property using the super. So it's very important to know, yes, it's quite easy to do, but there's a lot of rules and regulations around it of what you can and cannot do. And I give you an example, which I had a buyer that had this happen to him. He wanted to buy for his daughter, and he was going to buy an investment. His daughter was going to live there. She was going to pay the market value. But guess what? That is not allowed. You're not allowed to rent your property to anybody that's in any way related to you, even somebody that works for you. They're not allowed to. There is an exception to the rule, unless it's a farm. But let's face it, not many people, that doesn't apply to many people.
Yeah.
So it's quite simple. So self-managed super fund, like you said, can apply for a loan to buy a house, a townhouse, or an apartment. As we said, the lease has to be to an uninvolved party, and the property must also solely provide retirement benefits to fund members.
So I think that was a really important point. So just sort of make sure everyone's got that. For the vast majority of people, you're always thinking, what can I do to, look after my family? How can I do the best? So for most of us with young kids, we think, all right, well, let's buy a property. Let's try and help them get on that ladder early, particularly thinking, okay, well, what about if I buy a property and make them into the tenant, help subsidize the rent, they can look after it. You can't do that in super. And I think that's a trap that we probably would all fall into. I think that's really, really important. And because there's pretty big penalties if you do that, Lucas, isn't there? I think you get all the money taxed at the top rate or something, don't you?
That's 100% right. And look, and I tell you, at least 60% of the people, if not higher, that are buying are telling me the same story. I'm going to buy, let my son or my daughter is going to uni. She's going to live there, pay me the rent. I didn't even know about it until I looked into it. So it's a very common trap. Now, just to sort of move on, some people, this is another big trap. Some people will buy it in the country or by the seaside, thinking, you know what, when retirement age arrives, I'll just go and live there for the rest of my life. Now, that's great. You can do that. However, the asset is still in the name of the fund. And once you are at a retiring age and you want to move into it, you can do it, but you have to buy it, pay the current market value, and pay stamp duty on top. So it means you probably have to sell the family home where you're living, and the money you get to that, if you want to move into your super fund house, you have to buy that and pay stamp duty as well. So that's another tricky one that people don't realize.
Okay.
People think,
yeah, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, people think, okay, I'm going to be retiring age. That means I can move into it. It's not that simple.
So I think, for to break it down simply, most people would think, okay, it's my property. I'm now retired. This is my retirement fund. I'll just go and live in the property. And whilst you're saying that's okay, you effectively need to rob Peter to pay Paul. You need to take money outside of super to buy the property off your super fund to take it back out so you can go and live in it, which I guess, probably isn't the worst thing because, it's all your money, but you're obviously going to need to make sure that, you don't go and start living in it before you've transferred it from one to another. And I guess maybe for some people, you'd rather be paying the capital gains tax to yourself than buying it off the third party at the time, because I guess you're at least making money for yourself in one way or another.
Now, when it comes to borrow money through your super to buy a property, people should be aware that the interest rates for the super funds is slightly higher than your normal rates. So currently, you're looking at about 4% as an interest rate. However, the super fund can borrow up to 80% and for 30 years. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the tax side of things. So the self-managed super fund is required to pay 15% of tax on rental income generated for the property. However, if you do keep the property for more than 12 months, the fund receives a 1/3 discount on any capital gains made upon selling the property, which means that capital gain tax liability is down to just 10%.
Okay, so where we would typically be saying, all right, at the top tax rate, you're losing half your rental money to tax, and then from a capital gain point of view, you're losing a quarter. That must be why people love the idea of having in super, because you're paying only 15% of your rent money in tax, and then only an effective 10% of the capital gain when you do decide to sell it to the taxman.
That's right. Now, furthermore, if you borrow any money to complete the purchase, the interest payments are tax deductible to the fund, and if the expenses exceed the income, the taxable loss is carried forward to the next year and to the next year until there's a future taxable income that is high enough to be offset. Now, once the trustees start receiving a pension or retirement, any rental income or capital gains arising from the fund will be tax-free. Very important piece of information here, though. There is a cap, which is $1.6 million. Now, this is why I find so many people come to buy an apartment, because they know they'll still be under the cap. You go and buy a house for 1.8 million, well, there's no benefit there really for that.
Okay. So what you're saying is if, let's say you're in your late 40s, early 50s, you buy an apartment for, say, $500,000. 15 years later, you're in your late 60s, you retire, you move into pension phase with your super fund. Property's now doubled, it's worth $1 million. You can effectively sell that property and have that capital gains tax-free.
Correct. It's very, very important because people think...
Sign me up, my friend. I'm in.
Yeah, well, exactly, because people think, all right, I'm not going to pay any tax or whatever, but there is a cap. Not everybody knows that. It's $1.6 million. Now, finally, another important thing that people need to be aware of, that if you do decide to do any major improvements or renovations, that is allowed, but you cannot use the money, you cannot borrow money to do that. You have to use money that's already available in the super fund, okay? And also your loan repayments must be made from your self-managed super fund, which means you must always have available funds in there to meet the loan repayments. And you can use things like your income from your rental of the property, or you can do super contributions to the fund to assist you with this.
Okay. So obviously, I guess, particularly during shocks like we've had now with Corona, and you might have extended periods of vacancy, you need to make sure that you haven't overextended yourself and you've got some free cash flow in the super fund or income coming in from other sources so that you can keep making those mortgage payments while you're finding a tenant.
Yeah. And look, and lastly, James, quite interestingly, there's not there's not a set amount of how much money has to be in your super for you to use and buy property. But all the banks work, and all the funds work roughly of $200,000 at least. So as long as you have approximately $200,000 or more on your super fund, you can do this.
Okay. So for simple maths, you probably need to have wait until you've earned a cumulative $2 million across your working life. And at 10% in super, that'll give you about that 200 grand.
Yeah.
All right. So you'll do that in about 6 months. Yeah.
I mean, hopefully 5.5.
Okay. Good.